We all know that every 6th October each year we celebrate this day. This day is very important to us because we celebrate lives of those living with cerebral palsy, and most of these people are children. And in Uganda, this is a big problem. Cerebral palsy is not a disease. Cerebral palsy is a condition. And we call it a group of disorders. Actually, it's an umbrella term that describes a group of disorders that affect movement of a child. It can affect movement, it can also affect posture and other senses. How does cerebral palsy come up? Cerebral palsy is majorly caused by an abnormal development of the brain of the fetus. Now this is the baby within the mother's womb. Or this brain is still developing and it gets some injury. So cerebral palsy generally comes as a result of an abnormal development of the brain or injury to the developing brain. Cerebral palsy happens during pregnancy. It can happen at childbirth, or it can even happen shortly after childbirth. Worldwide, 70% of the cases of cerebral palsy we have happen during pregnancy. The 20% are those that develop this condition at the time of birth. Then the 10% are those that are going to develop cerebral palsy after childbirth. Actually, it is just shortly after childbirth. And we mainly look at cerebral palsy in children below 5 years, pregnancy up to 5 years. However much we may have adults living with this condition because they might have acquired this condition maybe shortly after childbirth or during pregnancy, and they have been living with this condition for so long. We have them. Those are 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and they are really living a comfortable life. What are the main risk factors for cerebral palsy? I want us to see what really happens during pregnancy that accounts for 70% of cerebral palsy in children. During pregnancy, especially what we call early pregnancy, those are 4 weeks or 5 weeks, we expect brain development to start. There could be some factors that can come up at that time, maybe because of unknown reasons. Because for us medics, we can't explain very well what happens. But because of some unknown reasons, there is an abnormal development at that time, 4 to 5 weeks of pregnancy. Research shows that pregnant mothers who lack enough folic acid, they are at high risk of having these babies who have had an abnormal development of the brain, possibly due to inadequate folic acid at this stage. So mothers who lack enough folic acid at this stage of brain development, it is very important because it helps in the development of the neural tube, and the neural tube develops into the brain and the spinal cord. So when you lack enough folic acid and you're a pregnant mother at this time, you are at a high chance of giving birth to a child who has gotten cerebral palsy because of an abnormal development of the brain. Still, during pregnancy, there are a lot of factors that can come up and cause a child to get cerebral palsy. One of them is maternal infections. Pregnant mothers are at a high risk of developing these infections, and mainly urinary tract infections, what we call the UTIs, sometimes even the STIs. Most of these infections, when they are not treated properly and with immediate attention and medical care, they could cross to the uterus where we have this developing fetus, the developing brain, and it could cause damage to the brain. And the child might end up with this disability we call cerebral palsy. Other infections like malaria. Malaria is also an infection. That's why we always encourage mothers to sleep under mosquito nets. because once a pregnant mother gets malaria and she doesn't get enough attention or medical care, this malaria can be terrible to the mother or even to the developing fetus within the womb. And especially the part we are looking at now is the brain. Mothers who take a lot of alcohol, who drink a lot, and some of them also do smoking. The substances in cigarettes, they are very dangerous because they interfere with blood saturation. And this can cause shortage of blood supply to the brain, because in the blood we need oxygen. When the brain is deprived of oxygen for some time, we can have brain cell death. Then the other factor is mothers who have twins. Now this is a risk factor. What we call multiple pregnancies. A mother who has more than one child, one baby in her womb, is at a high risk of giving birth to a child with cerebral palsy. I'm not saying whoever has twins is going to give birth to a child with cerebral palsy. I'm saying this is a high risk factor. You have more than one baby within your womb, within your uterus, twins, and so on and so forth. Then babies who are born before 37 weeks of pregnancy, they are at a high risk of developing brain injury, of having an abnormal development of the brain, and they can get cerebral palsy. Those are called premature babies. Babies who are born before 37 weeks of pregnancy, they are at high risk. Then we have these mothers, and maybe they have not been able to conceive. And because of some technology, what we call assistive reproductive technology, they are getting all other means to see if they can get pregnant. So we thank God they can become pregnant, but most of the times, the babies that come up as a result of assistive reproductive technology, we usually have them suffer from cerebral palsy. Then shortly, I want to brief you about what happens at childbirth. That is delivery, labor, and childbirth. The most common cause of cerebral palsy at this time is deprivation of oxygen to the brain. Especially, we have had cases of prolonged labor, maybe to some other cases like maybe issues to do with the umbilical cord, to do with the placenta, to do with the uterus. And this cause maybe this mother in labor to take a long period of time. And that time can damage our baby's brain. And most especially at this time, the brain is deprived of oxygen. And we shall see most of these mothers complain that when my baby was born, she or he didn't cry immediately. He wasn't able to breastfeed. Actually, he was even taken for oxygen support. These are the babies. Then a child can develop cerebral palsy even after childbirth, even when in a kindergarten, when they are even at school. A child can develop high fevers, maybe due to malaria or other infections. And once you don't attend to these fevers, they can cause inflammation of the brain. The brain cells swell. The brain swells, and this causes damage to the cells of the brain. And the child can get cerebral palsy. We have had some children who develop stroke, especially these ones with sickle cell disease. They are at high risk of developing brain damage, and they could get cerebral palsy. A child at home can get any injury because of a fall, an accidental fall, maybe from heights, like in a tree, maybe inside the house, maybe from a chair, and they get brain injury. And this can result to brain damage, which can cause cerebral palsy. I've had a challenge where we usually see these mothers come for antenatal care at a later stage. And remember, I told you brain development starts at 4 to 5 weeks. And the supplementation we give them in the hospital, especially the iron, the multivitamins, is important for the development of the brain at this stage. Then we strongly advise pregnant mothers to avoid drinking alcohol, even smoking, because I told you the substances within these cigarettes and alcohol interfere with blood saturation. Then the other thing is that a pregnant mother should come to the hospital as soon as possible once they are aware that they have some illnesses, especially urinary tract infections, STIs, and malaria. Those illnesses need immediate attention in the hospital. Then we usually encourage these mothers, pregnant mothers, to come for delivery, for labor in time, for them to get timely care from the specialists at that time. Maybe we are looking at the midwife, we are looking at the gynecologist and other doctors. Because once the mother comes to the hospital earlier, it could really save us from losing lives of these mothers and also maybe endangering the brains of such children. Then we strongly advise the caretakers at home to closely monitor their children, especially children who are below 2 years. They are at high risk of developing brain injuries once they get accidental falls or anything that hits their brain, because the brain at this stage is still developing.
And if one gets that condition,
unfortunately, we don't have the cure for cerebral palsy. We don't have just one drug or vaccine or something like that to cure cerebral palsy. But the good news still is that we have treatment. The treatment for cerebral palsy aims at improving functional independence of these children. Because once we have brain cell death, we can't recover those cells. But the treatment will entirely target re-educating the cells that were spared at the time of brain damage to do the function which is supposed to be done by the other cells of the brain that were damaged. And this is through training. We could do physiotherapy that involves a lot of exercises and stimulation. We could do occupational therapy. We could do speech and language therapy. These professionals help with feeding, development of speech and language. We could also have social workers, the counselors, and also the rehabilitators. We can only give medication to manage some symptoms or other complications that can come up as a result of the brain damage, such as seizures, the fits. These children who usually get fits, sometimes they develop what we call epilepsy. They should be on medication. We can give medication when we have maybe other illnesses like cough, flu, maybe stiff muscles. But we don't have single medication to cure cerebral palsy.